Okay, great. Welcome everybody to the Stripe quarterly all members meeting. If this is your first time joining us, welcome to the Stripe collaborative community. We're excited that you're here, and we're excited at the progress that we're making together. Bringing together a wealth of diversity and perspectives to solve some shared challenges in the field of pharmacogenomics. On today's quarterly all members meeting, we're excited to give you some updates about a new initiative that we're launching here in the coming weeks that we've been working on for some time now. We have two featured speakers that will be providing some exciting updates from their work in the field of PGX. And we'll be able to provide some perspective and some open forum discussion at the end of today's meeting. I'm Benjamin Brown. I'm Executive Director of the American Society of Pharmacovigilance, and I'm just excited to welcome everybody to today's meeting. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Sarah, and we'll get going. And just one quick reminder, if you just logged in, to please place your phone or your lines on mute unless you're going to be speaking. Thanks.
All right, great. Thanks, Ben. Let's see. So we are also excited to announce that registration is open for the Partners in Precision Medicine webinar series. The theme of this first series is how to find a laboratory of excellence. Throughout healthcare, stakeholders are faced with unique issues and complexities in integrating PGX testing into clinical workflows. Partners in Precision Medicine is a 12-week series with 6 sessions. Each focuses on a unique stakeholder perspective, including pharmacist, provider, patient, laboratory, regulatory, and international perspectives. The sessions will be moderated by Stripe members and feature presentations by invited speakers to share their perspective on challenges, opportunities, and best practices. So I will drop the registration link into the chat. It's free to register, and your one-time registration will give you access to all 6 webinars. We'll have breakout sessions, and you'll also get access to the archives. If you or your organization would like to help amplify this announcement, just let me know. We can share the social media toolkit later this week. The first session will be held on September 29th. And I just wanted to say thank you to our Communication Affairs Committee and Education team for an incredible effort in pulling together this wonderful program. And we're excited to create a forum to engage with the broader healthcare community and bring important conversations to the forefront. So with that, we will move over to our guest speakers for today. Stripe is a public-private forum to discuss and collaboratively resolve challenges related to pharmacogenetics testing. During this Hear from the Community segment of the meeting, we invite key organizations to share their work related to PGX so we can learn more about ongoing efforts in the space and explore opportunities to support these efforts and further Stripe's mission to bring personalized medicine practices to standard of care. So up first, we have Ann Moyer. Dr. Moyer is a director at the Personalized Genomics Laboratory at Mayo Clinic, and we're excited to hear more about her work with the Association for Molecular Pathology.
And Sarah, I do have this slide sharing here, but it's up to you. Anne, if you'd like to go first, I'm happy with that. We were having an initial issue with slide sharing, but we seem to have crossed that bridge. So, Anne, I'm happy to turn it over to you first.
I think if you've already got yours showing there and it's technically working right now, I'd say go for it. I can go right when you're done.
Okay. Fair enough then. Fair enough.
Okay, up first we have Andrew Monte. Dr. Monte is the president of the Pharmacogenomics Global Research Network, and we're excited to hear more about PGRN.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks, Anne, for the back and forth there, the whiplash on the slide sharing. But I'm happy to discuss a little bit about the PGRN. This will be, I think many people on the call know about PGRN, but I'll provide a large overview here and then sort of talk about some of our initiatives over the last year and sort of what's coming down the pike, because I think that'll be good to go through. So first of all, what is PGRN, right? So the PGRN was actually initially started through a NIH grant funding mechanism. It actually was funded first in the year 2000 and then actually went through 4 different iterations, which really helped to bring together pharmacogenomic and pharmacogenetic researchers. So since that time, we've transitioned to an independent society, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But the PGRN actually was really the nidus of a lot of the pharmacogenomic research and the work that's gone on over the last 20 years. CPIC, as well as PharmGKB were critical growth members and partners as when the PGRN started, and actually in a lot of respects helped really grow out of the PGRN. So if you haven't taken a look at our website, you'll see the link below, and please take a look. We're always looking for more members, and I think that you'll see some of the benefits that PGRN has. So I just briefly talk about the PGRN mission statement here and provide it, but I think that the big thing that I want to relate to the group here today is that it really, PGRN serves as a forum, and it really brings together researchers, educators, and practitioners in pharmacogenomics, and we're really excited to actually bring together these researchers toward actually improving the research in the field. You know, we are built on these pillars of education, research, collaboration, and clinical care. And so these are the things that we actually come back to every time that we think about new initiatives. Okay, well, does this support our work in education, our support in research collaboration, and our work in clinical care? Because those are really the pillars that we are built on. So the benefits of PGRN and some of the things that we do, you know, we really actually run a lot of different groups, and actually we have leadership programs. We have research tools. So in our toolbox on our website, you can go in and actually look for cohorts. You can actually utilize many of the tools that we as researchers utilize to run our studies. We help actually now we're putting together a grant, and I'll show you a little bit on that in a little while here. Of course, we have our bi-monthly research in progress sessions that I'll go over a little bit as well. But we also we really believe in mentoring the next generation of PGX researchers. So we have a lot of trainees actually in our organization as well, and we actually provide them forums to actually refine their presentation skills, mentorship programs, things along those lines. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what's happened in the last year. You know, the last year we transitioned from an NIH-funded society, you know, into an independent society. I've got our coronavirus over here on the right because really 2020 and 2021 was not just about coronavirus. It was a wonderful transition of the PGRN2, and I'm really proud of the progress we've made over the last year under the leadership of Kathy Giacomini. So I'm really, really pleased with that. We built partners with industry, which has really actually helped us support and actually grow our educational programs. We've significantly expanded our international membership, which is wonderful because it really is bringing together our entire organization across the world. So here's just a brief look at some of our members and our sponsors. You know, I'm really pleased with this because this allows us to actually see what's going on with our industry colleagues, and then actually, again, really helps us support some of our initiatives, such as our grant program, as well as many of our educational platforms. So our committees are really the key to our success, right? The PGRN is really all about the members, and it is driven by our members. And so insofar as that, our committees really help us move these initiatives forward. Our scientific program committees are really the ones that actually come up with all the PGRN RIP sessions. They actually help us put together the different meetings that we run on a yearly basis, and then also our virtual meetings over the last year. Our global PGX group also is growing, and we're actually trying to put together a wonderful specific global seminar as well, because that will help us actually provide content to our global members. That's making sure to be accessible to them and really speak to some of the things that they need that some of the other researchers here in the States or Europe don't necessarily need. Communications, you'll see multiple tweets from our communication groups. Our early career group, I must say, Jason Carnes has just been absolutely phenomenal. He's setting up a wonderful mentorship program. We have travel grants for our early career members. And then, of course, our education committee, which is really helping us to put together a lot of our programs as well. In addition, our publications group, right? We have a agreement with CPT actually, and so we provide content to CPT, and it actually provides a wonderful outlet for our members. So over this particular year, we are really interested, as I mentioned, on expanding our global community. So we've actually provided a lot of effort on this. And again, we're sort of pushing forward with new seminar series for our groups that are outside the US and Europe. And we're really hoping to actually continue to push this effort forward and provide the travel scholarships and things along those lines. We're actually hoping to spark a new research collaboration amongst PGRN members. And really the reason for that, we'll get into here briefly. But just taking a look at our global membership, right, you see that we really truly are worldwide. We're continuing to actually expand in Africa. And actually this is now a little bit of an older slide because you'd see some other additional countries colored in if I were to update it over the last month here. But the big thing here, as I mentioned, this research collaboration. Over our survey in 2020 really demonstrated a consistent request for increased collaboration. And so insofar as that, we are actually pushing forward with a PGRN collaboration research grant. And so this RFA actually was just, we just finished finalizing this over the last month or so. And I really have to thank our committee on this. Our research committee is actually really pushing this together. And really what this is going to do is actually going to be a grant that actually funds a collaborative effort. And this RFA will be coming out here shortly over the next month. And so the hope here is that it brings together groups. So it will not fund a single individual. This will really have to actually have a collaborative project. And we will also prioritize bringing in some of our global colleagues as well. So we're excited about this new grant that's coming forward out of the PGRM, and we hope that this will be the nidus that will grow over the coming years. Of course, our seminars will continue. We run these seminars really twice a month. The research in progress session, and here you see Josh Peterson actually giving his PGRN earlier this year. We also run early career RIPS, which is a wonderful platform for our trainees. And we've seen some of actually our best RIPS, I think, have come in the early career session. And then our quarterly best practices seminars, which we have actually really has focused a lot on clinical implementation. So we had a wonderful one from PharmCat just last month. CPIC has given us wonderful seminars as well. So I just will mention as well our upcoming virtual meetings. Unfortunately, we're still running a lot of these things virtually, but in October, paired with ASHG, we've got our advancements in global pharmacogenomics, again, back to one of our initiatives this year. And then we will also be hosting a seminar and a day with ASCPT, and our agenda is being finalized right now actually for that. That's likely to be run in February is what we think, but that will be a virtual meeting. We'd hoped that would be in person, but with ASCPT transitioning to a virtual meeting, it will be a virtual session. We are excited about it. However, we've got actually some wonderful speakers on tap, and we're actually going to make this into a workshop. And we're hopeful that that workshop will include some work with some of the All of Us workbench. So more to come on that here soon. And then, of course, we hope that an in-person meeting will progress in this coming summer. So we're in conversations right now, and we're trying to finalize that work as well. But you know, we are dying to bring everybody back together and in person, and we're hopeful that that will happen this coming summer. So more to come on that as those agreements are finalized. So now, you know, I provide our link here to our website, but those are the big things that we have been doing over the last year and what we've got planned this year. We're excited about our grant RFA that's coming out, and we're excited about our international initiatives. And so now let me take some questions.
Hi, Andrew. This is Ben Brown here. It seems like creating and providing opportunities to professionals younger in their careers seems to be a growing area of PGRN. And so I was curious if you could maybe just expand some more on the types of networking or mentorship opportunities that exist for younger professionals and what some of the best ways are that you've seen for them to get involved and get plugged in.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, I would just say join PGRN to your trainees because you know it is a very nominal cost. You know, $25 or I believe is what our membership is there, and it does provide those opportunities to present your work and talk through things. We've got that platform on a monthly basis for the trainees. In addition, I had mentioned this mentorship program, and so Jason Carnes is actually heading this up, and the hope is actually to kick that off coming up at our meeting with ASCPT. Again, you know, I think that the big deal there will be that we match our junior members with more senior mentors, and you know, people that don't have to be at the same institution. And so Jason is putting in a lot of work on that, and I think that you'll be seeing more and more of that through PGRN as well. We've got some wonderful senior mentors through PGRN, and making sure to open those opportunities up really outside of individual strong institutions, I think is a key for us. So, you know, we hope to continue to transition our junior trainees into more senior leadership positions. And I think Jason is actually a wonderful example of that, where he sort of started out as a trainee and then moved forward, and now he's actually running that group and is actually sitting on our council through PGRN. So the hope is to continue to grow our junior members into senior PGRN leadership and really senior leadership in the PGRN in the pharmacogenomics community overall.
Andrew, this is Dr. Burns Blacksall. Just quick question. Do you have any more details about the RFA budget, scope, timeline, deadlines, et cetera?
Great
by
question.
The way, it's super cool.
Yeah, great question. You know, so we are coming out with that really within the next kind of week or two here. We're just waiting for we're going to be presenting that to our council for final approval here. You know, it's actually a relatively smaller grant. It's a $10,000 grant, and it will focus on existing data sets, but really, again, kind of the grant here will grow with time. We actually have now been speaking with some of our industry colleagues in order to actually increase the funding here in subsequent years. But the idea will be existing data sets, bringing together and validation of projects that are out there, and sort of one group bringing together, you know, looking at other groups, sort of tools and or data sets in order to validate theirs. We're really actually, again, hoping together to bring people together, so this will not be a single group that comes in and actually looks for this. The RFA will actually be coming out here really soon, actually within the next, as I say, couple of weeks as we get the approval. As far as timeline goes of RFA, it'll be announced this month, and then actually we hope actually that the deadline will be the first of the year, and then the timeline will the projects will start in early 2022.
That's very cool. Thanks very much for the details. It seems like with the focus being on growing early career, because we really need to grow our own. There's not a lot of us in this field yet. There is a grant that, and I'm happy to participate. We can talk offline, but there's a Fondation Leduc, which is focused on cardiovascular, and they do international grants and collaborations that you must have people from both sides of the ocean. And it's largely focused on trainees and interchange of trainees so that they get different training in different systems. So anyway, I'm happy to talk offline because I think it's a great opportunity to really help grow the field with our young folks.
Absolutely. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put my email in the chat here so that you got that. And really, I want to be a resource to anybody within the group here. So feel free to reach out to me if there are additional questions.
Well, I'll send you a note later. Thanks.
I think we have time for one more question for Andrew. Okay.
Well, thanks so much, Ben. Sorry for
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's great. Thank you.
All right, great. So our next presenter is Ann Moyer, and Dr. Moyer is the director of Personalized Genomics Laboratory at Mayo Clinic, and we are excited to hear more about her work with the Association for Molecular Pathology.
Yeah, hi, thanks for inviting us to come and talk to you today. So I'm representing the Association for Molecular Pathology's Pharmacogenomics Working Group. And really the main goal recently of this group is we've been looking at laboratory testing for pharmacogenomics. So as you may know, historically, if a patient had a test done at 2 different laboratories, they might actually include different alleles in their tests. And so the patient presumably could get different results from the 2 labs, even though the 2 labs were both doing an excellent job in providing appropriate, correct results for what they tested. So the goal of this group really has been to put together recommendations for clinical genotyping allele selection to hopefully bring about more harmonization between laboratories and more standardization. And so although this is an Association for Molecular Pathology working group, I think one of the things that's really exciting about the group as well is that they've invited other societies to send representatives to participate as well. So as you can see, I've got up on the screen the title slide, I guess, from our most recent recommendations, which are for CYP2D6. And you can see it's expanded beyond just the Association for Molecular Pathology to include representation from the College of American Pathologists. And I've actually been representing the College of American Pathologists on this group for a little bit now, which has been good. The Dutch Pharmacogenetics Working Group of the Royal Dutch Pharmacists Association, and the European Society for Pharmacogenomics and Personalized Therapy. And so here you can see everybody that worked together on the CYP2D6 genotyping recommendations, and many of the members of this group have been working on previous recommendations as well. And so again, you can see that there are representatives from multiple different groups here. So I think one thing to highlight is even though the CYP2D6 recommendations are the most recent one, we've actually had several other projects before this as well. So they started with CYP2C19 and then CYP2C9, and then kind of as a companion really to CYP2C9 expanded to include the other warfarin-related genes, and then most recently CYP2D6, but there will be recommendations for additional genes coming in the future as well. And so how do we go about thinking about, well, what should these alleles be? So what we've ended up breaking these down into is 2 tiers. So tier 1 is the minimum test or minimum set of alleles that really we think labs really should be testing for. So we call it really our must test alleles. And what goes into that group is alleles where they have a well-characterized effect on the function of the protein or gene expression. They have an appreciable minor allele frequency in a patient population, and the exact cutoff for that may vary from one gene to the next, but with CYP2D6, we felt that for tier 1, they had to have at least a minor allele frequency of 1%, and for tier 2, at least 0.1%. And then one thing to note for the CYP2D6 guidelines specifically, or recommendations specifically, is that we only evaluated alleles up to star 114. So if additional alleles have been described after that, they are not included at this time, but maybe in a future update. Another criteria for tier 1 is that the allele has to have available reference materials, and this is important so that laboratories are able to have a reference material for developing their test. And then one thing that we added for CYP2D6 that was not part of the criteria before this is technical feasibility to detect a variant by a clinical laboratory, and I'll show you what I mean by that in just a couple minutes. And we also have tier 2, which is the extended panel, and so these are additional alleles laboratories may want to test for, and they meet at least one of the criteria above, but not all of the criteria. So again, tier 1 is what we consider really the minimum must-test list of alleles that we would really like to see all clinical laboratories adopting, and then tier 2 would be those additional alleles that over time may be promoted to tier 1, depending on if reference materials are identified later or the function becomes better characterized. And so just for CYP2D6, here's the table that shows our tier 1 must-test list of alleles. And so just a few things to highlight is one thing that we thought was really important was to help laboratories understand what the core variants are, and these would be the characteristic variants that are associated with the altered function. And another thing that's really challenging in pharmacogenomics is that there are multiple different systems of nomenclature out there. And so we ended up providing all of them in hopes that this document would also be useful as a crosswalk for laboratories. But what we'd really like to see labs focus on is HGVS nomenclature going forward. I think many of us are more comfortable, in all honesty, with legacy nomenclature, but just in general for hereditary genetic testing, we typically use HGVS nomenclature. And so for pharmacogenomics, it might help with standardization if we work towards that for pharmacogenomics as well. And then whether reference materials are available, and again, for tier 1, that was one of the requirements. And if you wanted to see the reference materials specifically for these alleles, they're in table 1 of the full manuscript. And then again, the multi-ethnic allele frequency also ends up being very important. And it's a little bit tricky when you're doing these pharmacogenomics alleles because sometimes there might be multiple variants, so it's a little bit harder to go look at something like NOMAD, which would be a big population database. So we were able to rely on some of the data that CPIC has for the actual allele frequencies. And so just a snapshot of a few of the variants that we included. Some people might have wondered, well, why did you include star 2 if it has normal function? Well, this one we included because some of the variants that define star 2 are also present in many other haplotypes, and so they're often interrogated by labs to differentiate amongst some of the other haplotypes. So we thought that that was important. And then a few things to note is that the defining variant for star 9 is also present in star 109 and star 115, and that the defining allele or variant for star 10, the C.100 C to T, is present in many alleles. And it's kind of the same thing, star 17, that defining variant is in multiple alleles. And one thing for star 29 in particular is that many platforms only test the C.1012 G to A due to difficulty in testing that insertion and deletion. And this particular variant that is the one that most labs would test for is also present in several other alleles. And then we ended up including duplications in tier 1. And in general, laboratories can detect a duplication with a single probe, but sometimes you can't tell the difference between a duplication and a hybrid allele with this approach. And the functional effect of a duplication would depend on what the specific allele was that was duplicated. So, for example, if you have 2 alleles and they have 2 different activities, then if the one with perhaps no activity is duplicated versus the one with full activity is duplicated, you would expect a different phenotype. And here's an example of our tier 2 alleles, or not really an example, the list of the tier 2 alleles, rather. And we wanted to also provide a little information about why some of these alleles are in tier 2 and not in tier 1. So there were many of these alleles that just didn't meet the minor allele frequency requirements for tier 1, shown in the orange boxes here. There were also several different alleles that did not have reference materials available, and so these are the ones that are most likely to be promoted to Tier 1 if reference materials do become available in the future. Some of these didn't meet the minor allele frequency cutoff or the reference material available criteria, so those ones will probably be stuck in Tier 2. And then I wanted to highlight star 40. This is an example of one where we ended up utilizing that new criteria about it being difficult technically for laboratories to detect this allele, and so that's why we had left it in Tier 2. So this one has a large in-frame insertion of 18 base pairs, and so this is just something that most laboratories aren't testing for right now due to the challenges, but perhaps as technology improves in the future, it may become more technically feasible. And the other thing I want to touch on a little bit more is the hybrid alleles. So this is something that we thought was really challenging to think through and rather unique to CYP2D6 compared to the other genes that we've tackled before. So one thing to note is that a lot of laboratories test for CYP2D6 duplication by using just a probe in exon 9. And so when you do that, one of the challenges is that you can't really differentiate between whether you have a true gene duplication or perhaps a CYP2D7, CYP2D6 hybrid allele, because these ones start out CYP2D6 at the 5' portion of the gene, and then, CYP2D7 at the 5' portion of the gene, and then flip to CYP2D6 towards the 3' portion. And so a CNV probe that would be located in exon 9 would see this hybrid allele, and therefore it would look like it might be a duplication. And so here's just from our paper a table that shows whether you expect there to be a signal or not in each different location within the gene for a hybrid allele. So these ones are all known as star 13. So in this example, though, if the hybrid allele is instead a CYP2D6, CYP2D7, so the 5' portion is CYP2D6 and the 3' portion is CYP2D7, then with the CNV probe that's in the 3' portion of the gene, or in exon 9 most commonly, you would not see the hybrid allele at all, so it would just go undetected. But these hybrid alleles don't have activity, so that's probably okay in this situation. And the great news, we think, is that the star 13s, which are the 2D7, 2D6s, tend to be less common than the CYP2D6, CYP2D7 hybrid alleles. So what laboratories could do, which is basically what we're suggesting in Tier 2, is instead of using just one probe, if they use two different probes, one towards the beginning of the gene and one towards the end, perhaps where their exon 9 probe is today, then they would be able to detect a hybrid allele as well. And so in this case, you'd be able to actually identify this CYP2D6, CYP2D7 hybrid allele, but you would know that it wasn't a true gene duplication, but rather that it was a hybrid because you would see a signal for the 5' portion, but not for the 3' portion. And so again, here's just a table to show some of the more common hybrid alleles that laboratories might encounter and where you might expect to see or not see a signal. There were several other alleles that were considered but not included in a tier, and some of this was because, for example, with the star 11 allele, the CPIC frequency data suggested that it had a fairly high minor allele frequency of up to 0.1% in the European population. But in this case, we actually did look at NOMAD data, which is, again, a large population database. And for the common defining variant, it looked like the minor allele frequency was really only up to 0.025%. So we felt that the frequency was too low for this one. In addition, star 69 was evaluated, which is a no functional allele, but this one is really quite difficult to discriminate from other haplotypes, and so we ended up excluding this one. And then there's also a CYP2D6 enhancer variant that's been published about that's about 116 kb downstream of CYP2D6, and it's thought to modulate the expression levels, but the evidence at this point is still conflicting and limited, so we didn't think it met the criteria for having a well-established function. So if you adopt these alleles in clinical testing, and again, just to refresh everyone's memory of what we had in Tier 1 versus in Tier 2, for the Tier 1 variants alone, we would expect to be able to detect about 75% of the variants that are identified in African American populations, and about 84% of variants identified in European Caucasian populations, and about 85% of the variants in East Asian populations. And then for Tier 2, if those are also included, you can see a little bit of an increase up to 80% for African American populations, 85% for European Caucasians, and 87% for East Asian populations. And so in general, this is just a snapshot of what we've been working on for CYP2D6, but a very similar process was used for the other genes and the other guidelines that I mentioned earlier. And in general, it's been a very good group to work with. So a few people to thank is Dr. Vicki Pratt is our fearless leader on this project. And so if you have any feedback about these guidelines or recommendations rather that have been published thus far, or ideas of ones you think we should be working on next, she'd be the person to email, and her email address is shown on your screen. But also the AMP Clinical Practice Committee has been very supportive of this effort, and AMP staff have also been very helpful, and the whole entire AMP Pharmacogenomics Working Group has been really great to work with on this particular recommendations, as well as all of them in general. And so a couple of the questions that I was asked to mention for our particular working group is, how would you get involved if you were interested? So we thought that the best answer to that is that if you joined AMP and applied for volunteer opportunities as they arise, that would be a potential pathway. We can't guarantee that you would be selected for this specific working group, but that'd be kind of your pathway forward. Or if you were not planning on joining AMP and trying to get that involved, I think another way to get involved is just providing feedback to the working group, as I mentioned before, about what you think about these recommendations, if there are other genes that you think are important to be working on and whatnot. And I think the thing that we're really excited to mention is, well, how would you support this work? Well, if you are working in a clinical laboratory, the best way to support this work is to ensure that your laboratory is actually including all of these Tier 1 must-test alleles. Or if you aren't working in a clinical laboratory, but rather you are somebody that orders testing from a clinical laboratory, then another thing that you could look into as well is the laboratory that I'm getting my testing from, including these Tier 1 alleles, and if not, are they aware of these recommendations? And maybe just spreading some awareness would be something that would be really helpful, and hopefully this will get us to having more consistent testing for all of our patients that are out there. And with that, that's all I had to share, but I'd be happy to take any questions.
And thank you so much. Yes, let's take some questions from the audience. Okay.
And this is Andrew again. Thanks so much for this presentation. I'm really, really excited about all the work that AMP has been doing. It's just wonderful. Quick question about the sort of longer term plan for reevaluation moving forward as more evidence comes out. Do you have a sort of strategy and plan for reevaluating over time?
I don't think we have anything definitively established yet at this point in time, but we're all aware that this is something that's going to be important to consider, because I know that the CDC Get RM group is doing a great job of working on identifying additional reference materials, so that's definitely something that'll alter some of the recommendations. We know that there's a lot of basic science going on that's fantastic, where some of these alleles are getting better characterized, and that'll definitely impact the recommendations long term. And there are a lot more genes to work on, which I guess that doesn't really address your question quite, but that's kind of one of our other future directions. So I know we're really interested in revisiting them, but the details and logistics have not been fully established yet.
Makes sense. I suppose, clearly you have to address the most important, very important pharmacogenes first. So I understand.
And a question we'd had from the group was, what is your perception of some of the biggest drivers of variation in current PGX test reporting and interpretation?
Actually, I think a lot of it just drives from this being historically something that individual labs were trying to figure out how to do it on their own. So I think a lot of labs have been doing this testing long before CPIC was established and working in this space, and long before some of these larger collaborative communities have come together. And so since every lab had to kind of figure it out on their own, I think they just had different ways of going about it. And a number of labs use different commercial platforms, so depending on what happens to be available on that commercial platform, that also drives some of it. But I think in general, a lot of laboratories are excited about having some sort of guidance in what you should be selecting and how to go about doing these genotype to phenotype interpretations. And so I think just having a lot of these communities that didn't exist 10, 15 years ago will probably be helping quite a bit to get towards more standardization.
I'd like to ask a question. how do we keep up? Where's the data going to be, or the information, to make sure that we're reporting on the most up to date, the most valid?
I think that's always something that's really, really challenging, because it's, at this point, it feels like the field is moving very quickly, and that there are always new variants that people are finding because we're sequencing more patients. Or currently, even though a lot of the clinical laboratories are doing a lot of targeted genotyping, I think long term, if clinical laboratories start doing sequencing, it's going to become even more challenging for a while. But perhaps the more people that we've evaluated, maybe the pace of new things will slow down over time. But I think that's definitely a challenge, and I think having these collaborative groups is probably the best way to address some of that, because then we can share information back and forth, rather than back in the day being an individual laboratory trying to do your PubMed searches and trying to keep up with everything yourself. I think the more the community works together, the better.
But where's the latest now for us to see? So that we can pick the right lab, so we can pick the right reporting platform.
I guess I would say that as a laboratory, the side of things, I'm not sure if you're coming from the ordering provider side, but
No,
I would.
I'm coming from it as recommending for consumers and employers what panel they should ask for.
I think that's something where it's a good conversation to have with the laboratory that you work with. So a lot of like hospitals and whatnot would have a specific lab that they tend to send out to. So if it's one that you normally are working with, have the conversation with them and ask them, hey, do you include these AMP tier 1 alleles in your testing and in your reporting? And if not, maybe that's a good place to start in talking about that. But otherwise, I think if it's a patient, since a lot of laboratories aren't direct to consumer, they're going to end up needing to talk to their provider about it. So I think really spreading the awareness and having the conversation with both the laboratory and the stakeholders that are ordering it is a good place to be.
Yeah,
Right,
so
Anne?
the doctors don't know. So talking to the doctor doesn't help.
Well, I know this wasn't a free advertising for Partners in Precision Medicine, but it sure seems like free advertising for Partners in Precision Medicine, how to find a laboratory of excellence, which we're launching at the end of the month. We had a hand raised from Don Rule. Don, you can unmute your line and jump in, please.
Hello, Anne. Thank you very much. I'm curious, what is the best source now for the phenotypic assignment? Assuming that we now have a good sense of what alleles should be testing, where's the best source for that information? What we're finding is an awful lot of it tends to be self-referential. All the sources point to all other sources. And I'm curious how you come up to that agreement on it. And secondly, do you envision that we will begin to see different phenotypic assignments for different substrates?
Well, that's definitely outside of the scope of this particular group, but it's something I personally am really interested in, and I think it is actually a challenge. So from our personal lab, the main place that we're looking right now for a lot of that information tends to be following the CPIC guidelines, because that's going to be the most standardized. However, as I alluded to a few minutes ago, I think there's a lot of interest from clinical laboratories in over time converting over to doing more sequencing, and there are certainly genes that kind of have emerging levels of evidence, and maybe genotype to phenotype hasn't been as well established there. So I think right now laboratories are probably mostly going out and looking at the primary literature, but I think it's definitely something that needs more discussion.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Anne. I really appreciate your work in the presentation. So we will do want to reserve a few minutes for the committees to share any updates that they have. So we'll go ahead and now invite leadership from the committees to share updates. So we'll start with Communication Affairs if you have anything, Tricia.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Tricia Kenny. I lead the communications team. I work for Thermo Fisher. The communication team meets the fourth Friday of every month. So if anyone at 8 a.m. Pacific, if anyone's interested in joining the team, please reach out to me by LinkedIn or through Sarah, Ben, etc. So our 3 main things that we've been working on are the Partners in Precision Medicine webinar series, which we've talked about many times today. That's been led by Sean and Sarah from the education team. So the big go-do here for this community is really, check out the agenda for the different webinar sections. Please attend the webinars. Please promote the webinars. There'll be Q&A during the different webinars. So we really want it to be a very engaging, active webinar series. The social media toolkit to promote the webinar will be coming out later this week. So please watch out for that if you want to help us share all the event information. I'm also going to provide that in the chat function. I'll provide some links for you guys. The second thing that we've been working on is really making sure patients have a voice, and that's been led by Rachel Brummert. She's on the call today. Thank you, Rachel, for all your efforts here. She's kicked off a, I don't know if you'd call it a podcast or webinar series, but it's called Real Talk with Rachel, Conversations with Patient Advocates. And so she has a number of different advocacy organizations that she's been working with. So again, check out, I'll send the link. These sessions are posted on the American Society of Pharmacovigilance website, and then Rachel also posts them as well. So these are great. We always have to make sure we keep the patient in mind. So super happy that we're doing these. And then everyone should, make sure that they receive and read our Stripe newsletter. Right now, we publish the Stripe newsletter once a month. That's managed by Jenna Youngkin. She happens to work on my team. This is your go-to resource for all the news events. We also, share, we'll share the webinars, we'll share the stuff that Rachel's been working on. And going forward, we're going to have updates from all the subcommittees. So I'm sure everyone wants to know what everyone else involved in Stripe is working on. So we'll make sure those updates are included there. We also want to make sure that, we foster, this is a collaborative community. We want to make sure we foster communication amongst members. So we're going to be looking at different ways we can learn about what each other and our organizations are doing to foster implementation of pharmacogenomics. And then just one last shout out. There's a couple of really nice PGX events happening live in person in Pittsburgh next week. The first one is organized by the University of Pittsburgh School of Pharmacy. That's Phil Empey. He's a member of Stripe. I don't think he's on the call today, but he's hosting a full day meeting called Achieving Population Scale Pharmacogenomics, where he's invited various stakeholders across different industries, academic, companies, government, etc., talking about, different models of implementation. Obviously, we'll discuss some of the challenges we've all faced, and then also some sessions on reimbursement. And that meeting precedes the PMWC Pittsburgh meeting, which is on September, is that 23 and 24? It's the Thursday and Friday next week. And there is a PGX track with 6 different speakers. So if you're anxious to get out of your home office and talk pharmacogenomics, please meet us there. That's all I have for today, Sarah.
Great, thank you so much. And I mean, just truly a tremendous effort by the whole team. Let's see, up next, Consensus Development Subcommittee. Gwen, if you have anything to share with the group, feel free.
Yeah, so we are just really getting started. We finally have our slate of members approved and are moving forward with commitment letters and so forth, and then hoping to have our kickoff meeting in October.
Yes, great. And we're really excited about kicking off the next two committees, and we're also just about to kick off evidentiary standards as well. And if Nita or Bronwyn, you have any updates to share with the community, feel free to jump in.
I just have one. This is Bronwyn. I just have one quickie update. I had a really wonderful conversation with Jamie Halley at the CAP and Birgit Funk. Birgit was one of the primary authors on the validation standards for NGS. And having now established this relationship with Jamie Halley at the CAP, I think the Evidentiary Standards Committee is going to be in a great position to develop a set of standards that doesn't necessarily mimic that guideline, but fits in well with it and is well positioned to be accepted as broadly as those standards have been accepted, including by the CLSI and international groups and nationally here. So I think that's going to be a great boon to us, and it'll make us contributors in a long-standing way to the field. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Hi, so this is Nita. Just a quick update. We did get our slate of members for the Evidentiary Standards Committee. We have a tall task to synthesize and harmonize stakeholder perspectives develop a framework for how markers are identified and how decision is provided for PGX. So, with Bronwyn's expertise, really looking at what's the validation standards for PGX. So we're looking forward to having a kickoff meeting pretty soon in the next week or two. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Dan, if you have anything on Study Design Task Force, feel free to share.
Yeah, sure. So the Study Design Task Force, our main charge is to sort of come to consensus on the level of evidence required for demonstrating clinical utility. We've decided to do this sort of in parallel on 3 tracks. So what will be the level of evidence required for clinicians or clinical groups, the level of evidence for payers or reimbursement, and then the level of evidence for regulators. So we had our kickoff meeting a couple weeks ago, and we have staffed up our 3 different subcommittees, and each of those is launching within the next couple of weeks, each of which has sort of experts and stakeholders in each of those 3 different areas that we're working on. So we're getting started, and we're really excited to start figuring out what the level of evidence looks like across different groups and trying to come to some kind of meaningful consensus to move forward.
Great, thank you, Dan. Yeah, so big things happening. The community is coming together really nicely around some really important topics, and we're, just excited to see what comes. So with the last 5 minutes, we do have time if we can turn it back over to all of you for any additional questions or comments that you'd like to bring up for open discussion with our last few minutes here.
Okay.
I'll just,
Ben.
I was just going to
No,
speak for
go
him and
ahead,
say
Bruce.
thanks for pulling this together, and it's exciting to see this initiative growing.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what Bern said and thank each and every one of you again. As you'll notice, the number of attendees on our meetings continues to grow. Participation and engagement in the community continues to grow. The progress that we're seeing amongst our subcommittees continues to grow. So I just wanted to say thank you. It just keeps getting better and better. And so we're excited for the work that we're doing, the initiatives that we're launching. And because of each and every one of you, the community continues to grow and prosper. So thank you. We look forward to seeing you at our Partners in Precision Medicine series or one of our other many community initiatives, some even happening this week. I just want to wish you guys a great rest of the week. Stay safe. We look forward to seeing all of you soon. Thank you very much. Have a great week.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.